Hi, everybody. My name is Joel Hinman. I run the reading series for the Writers Studio. And when we scheduled this reading, we had no idea that Russia would invade Ukraine and we would all be so filled with despair and traumatized by it. We decided to go ahead with this, not because we hope to distract you from that trauma, but because we feel that sometimes during difficult times, it's great to be reminded that in creativity, there's strength, and that particularly for writers, we're sustained by a sense of empathy. That said, I'm thrilled tonight to be able to introduce my colleagues. This is the faculty reading, and you're going to hear this evening from Nancy Connors, Peter Krass, Michele Herman, Peggy Stone, Lisa Bellamy, Nicole, Cifani, Lehmann-Haupt, and I think that's it. I think I got everybody. Anyway, if you're not familiar with the Writers Studio, let me just take a moment to tell you. We were started 34 years ago by Pulitzer Prize winning poet Philip Schultz. And we have three main areas of focus: fiction, poetry, and memoir. And the great thing about tonight is you're going to get to hear from writers who work in each of those different strains. We're a workshop that's online, and we're also right now virtually in classrooms, hoping to get back into actual classrooms in the foreseeable future. So we're online and we're in classrooms, and we are based in New York. However, we have very strong satellite programs in Tucson, Arizona, in San Francisco, California, and now in Rome, Italy. So that's a little bit about us. At the end of this, I'm going to reappear to give those of you who are interested a little more information about how to contact us to follow up. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Nancy Connors. Nancy's a teacher in the tutorial program at the Writers Studio and a student of Philip Schultz's master class. Her poems and stories have most recently appeared in the Stone Coast Review, Fail Better, and the Journal of Compressed Creative Arts. Okay, Nancy, would you unmute and take it away?
Thank you so much, Joel. And I'd also like to thank Phil Schultz and the Writers Studio for this opportunity to read tonight, and thank all of you for being here. I'm going to read two short pieces about work. The first is called Dear Internal Communications Content Manager for the Upper Midwest. Dear Internal Communications Content Manager for the Upper Midwest, I have a question I hope you can answer. How do you choose the employees to profile each month in Get to Know Your Awesome Colleagues? These profiles are a great way to learn about people in other offices on a personal level. I was particularly intrigued by Fenny Peek in the Amsterdam office and his answer to the question, what's something about you that would surprise most people? Imagine narrowly escaping death in Albania at the hands of your own father. What a vacation to remember. I have noticed that most of the people profiled are under 30 and are good looking in a smiley and upbeat way. Frankly, and not to be harsh, but I don't see many people like that here in the Wichita office. We tend to have a more crushed by life look about us. And to my knowledge, we don't go looking for our long lost relatives in dangerous places or travel to locales where a tank of oxygen is a must. Although Annie Fuchs did swim with the dolphins last year in Florida, and Gene Horowitz, who volunteers for Habitat for Humanity, smashed his thumb pretty bad on a job site last year. Do you think these profiles you write about Global Actuarial Consulting's beautiful people might make a few of your readers regret their lives? I'm not suggesting that you stop doing them, but maybe you could look for more representative employees for your features. People who didn't do anything nearly as wild as Anu Patel in the New York office with his fire juggling. And let me just add, wow. But people who lead pretty darned exciting lives anyhow, or would like to. Because let's face it, exciting is best defined by the person experiencing it. It doesn't always involve near-death experiences with a goat knife or the risk of third-degree burns. I'll give you an example. Do you ever watch birds? I do. My favorite spot is Oak Park, right here in Wichita. Some birds' migration patterns send them through there in spring and fall. One type that passes through is the indigo bunting. Every spring, they travel more than 2,000 miles from Central America to our own city. But once they arrive, they don't perch at the top of a tree and brag about it like some other birds I could name. In fact, they're hard to spot. You could go out every morning in spring and summer with the best binoculars you can buy, and you might never see an indigo bunting. They're small and fast. But maybe one day you're sitting on a park bench thinking of other things, like whether it's really worth the trouble to get a new dress for your brother's wedding, since nobody interesting will be there. And then a surprise of blue, a blue so blue it's iridescent, will fly past you. And for the rest of the day, you'll think about that flash, and you'll try to compare it to other things, like the blue on the wings of the male morpho butterfly in your ex-boyfriend's collection. And you'll ask yourself, did I really see it? Or did I want to see it so badly that I invented it for myself? Then you'll realize that you did see it, because your mind could not have made up a blue so surprising, so alive as what you glimpsed. And you'll feel such a thrill that you've seen a tiny jewel-colored bird that has just flown 2,000 miles. A bird that only shows itself to someone who knows how to be quiet and still. Somebody who's there by themselves, waiting, ready to be surprised. Sincerely, Anna Holstrom, Wichita office. Thank you. My next piece is called Who Could You Stand to Kiss? And it was just published last month by the Fair in the UK. We're in our cubes writing brochures about the importance of actuarial science when Sharon S. looks up from her laptop and she's like, okay, who in this office could you stand to kiss? And Sharon W. and I look at each other like, well, this is different. And for a second, there's that unspoken acknowledgement that a kiss is as far as we would go, even in fantasy, because we're all married happily, or at least not unhappily. And anyway, who knows what happily really means? Because let's face it, it changes from day to day, depending on how much you're suffering due to big things, loss of job, loss of mind, loss of faith, and little ones, loss of house keys. But the real problem with the game, Sharon S. has proposed, is the available personnel, because we work for an actuarial consulting company, and the actuarial profession tends to attract, and I'll be blunt here, short, boring men, so much so that we have started referring to any colleague of normal height as a giant among actuaries, which we know is mean, but true. And besides, these guys make twice as much money as we do. And we know from dull gray experience that any so-called holiday party at the office will be filled with competitive comparisons of actuarial exam scores and estimates of when the Social Security Trust Fund will go broke. So you can see why Sharon S. said, who could you stand to kiss, and not, for example, who could get you to leave your husband by raising an eyebrow. And it's not that we're all that spectacular ourselves, but we have standards. So it quickly comes down to 3 actuaries and 1 tech guy. And Sharon S. picks the tech guy, who isn't bad, except that nobody has ever seen him smile and he won't make eye contact. But as she points out, he has good lips, not juicy, but acceptable. And then it's my turn. And I choose Todd, which makes the other 2 go, ugh, because he always greets us with, hello, ladies. But I pick him because I feel sorry for him. And I know how grateful he'd be. And I would be his fantasy woman for months. And then it's Sharon W.'s turn, and she can't decide. And then out of nowhere, she picks the proofreader with the damaged face and the wife who has MS. And Sharon and I are like, pity kiss? And she's like, no, I think suffering makes you passionate. And I'm like, are you in high school? And then we go back to our work, but I can't stop thinking about suffering and how much of it there is, even in our little office. And I think if you were suffering and your heart was slowly breaking, what if there was someone who would be willing to get close enough to you to place their lips on yours and leave them there for a while? Maybe even close their eyes and hum a little in appreciation of the moment, in appreciation of you as a kisser. And that kiss might not change anything in your life, except to be something to think back on from time to time, to think someone saw me and came close to me and pressed their lips against mine. And it wasn't enough, not nearly, but it was something. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to introduce Peter Krass. Peter is a longtime teacher at the Writers Studio, where he currently leads the online advanced poetry workshop. His chapbook, My 60s, will be published by Finishing Line Press in June. Peter's poems have appeared in the Adirondack Review, Black Fork Review, Caesura, Rattle, and elsewhere. He is also the poetry co-editor of an anthology, The Writers Studio at 30.
It's a delight to be here with my very fine colleagues. I'd like, as Nancy mentioned, I have this book coming out, My 60s, and I'd like to read a couple of poems from that. The first is there's actually two poems in the collection, both entitled My 60s. This is the first one. My 60s. In my little town, the 60s didn't arrive until the 70s. Elsewhere, the summer of love was greening. Here, the summer was humid and hateful, a boring blaze of claustrophobia, its soundtrack the chirruping of 1,000 lovesick frogs. Woodstock, Chicago, and Vietnam were very far away. Here, woodchucks outnumbered books by Ginsberg and Brodigan, and a march of protest was harder to find than the pale opossum shot in the speeding crossfire of headlights. In our town so small, the mailman grinned, "I have a letter from your girlfriend." And it was true, even if she wasn't. Nights, the hollers of short-fused fathers rumbled across the hollows of cul-de-sacs. Days, my friends and I flew to the ragged fields, fallow as an aimless Sunday, of overgrown farms, sold to developers, but not yet developed. Puffing, pilfered Pall Malls, sipping white meth, dreamed of escape on the battered bicycles and oil-bleeding motorbikes we rode in those enclosed fields, twisting in the air like hooked trout. It was while cruising a little white Honda, the blue exhaust a smoke signal of hope, that I spied the 60s at last. They were perched high in a sycamore, and they waved, forming the leaves into the familiar, welcoming shape of a foreign nation's friendly flag. I dreamed of papers, signed, stamped, and sealed, rustling in the pocket that nestled my heart. I shifted the bike into third, its highest gear, then waved back with my left hand, the palm closest to my pulsing desire, telling the 60s I'd soon be there. Then with the right, my hand of strength, I twisted the throttle as far as it would go, and farther, until the engine sang a new song, a music strange but welcoming too, as we shifted into fourth gear, then fifth, and even into sixth. Thank you. I grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey, which is sort of Bruce Springsteen country. I was actually born in Neptune, which is a town over from Asbury Park, which he sort of made famous. And so when I was in high school, his first album came out and he played at a local Catholic high school. And my friends and I went to this concert. And that's where this poem is set. It's called Greetings from Asbury Park. Hell yeah, Bruce was one of us. Well, best friend of a friend's older brother, knowing the same boardwalk bars we knew, inhaling the same sour beer, same burger fumes, frequenting the same midnight diners, his pores oozing like ours with dirty coffee grinds. Like us, his sandy lips were cooled by vanilla frozen custards by the seaside, and puffs of perfect Marlboro rings forming halos above the boardwalk's beams. But no, Bruce wasn't like us at all. The night in the high school gymnasium, he took the stage like a winged god, making a late-night emergency call, jangling his beat-up Telecaster the way November shakes a tree, until the leaves feel grateful for a chance to fall. He spat out our dreams in full formation. The drums pulsed a backbeat from our perspiration, and the keyboards convulsed with our secret rhymes. And then we loved him for everything he wasn't. Not our small town despair, not our adolescent ennui, not even our indolence, which we'd soon ride like a sleeper car rattling through the night. Later, he rode in limousines, the windows tinted, nearly black, a giant rearview mirror providing the only view. When he looked for us there, he saw his own shadow and the outlines of the boys we used to be. Thank you. And for my last poem, this is also set around Asbury Park, but during a later period. This is in the second half of the book, when I'm in my 60s. And the boardwalk there was deserted and kind of almost like ruins for about, 20, 30 years. More recently, they've been fixed up, but this is set during that faded glory period, and it's called Boardwalk Blues. Here, where cones of frozen custard once thrilled, and nostril-curling cups of fries dripped melted curds of day-glow cheese, I heard the sand sing songs of change, and the wind was humming along. Now the boardwalk's dusty timbers splinter and split, spit rusty nails. Even the fortune teller's booth, boarded up and empty, keeps a secret of the past. The wind still blows, but the sand seems tired. So much disappointed dirt that once upon a time was stone. How I'd like to shake their hands, I who also hope to change the world with nothing more than air. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce the next reader. It's Michele Herman. Michele is the author of a novel entitled Save the Village and 2 poetry chapbooks, Just Another Jack, The Private Lives of Nursery Rhymes, and Victory Boulevard. Her poems have appeared in recent issues of Plowshares, Carve, the Hudson Review, The Sun, and New York Quarterly. And she was a finalist for the 2021 Jack Grapes Poetry Prize. In addition to teaching fiction, poetry, and memoir, Michele does developmental editing, writes occasional columns about Greenwich Village life for the Village Sun, and performs her own work on the New York cabaret circuit. So please join me in welcoming Michele Herman.
Thank you, Peter, and way to go, Peter and Nancy. I always like to give a shout out to my students, past and present. I'm going to read from the novel, Save the Village. And this is a section from the middle of the opening chapter. There are a couple of things you need to know. This is a walking tour in progress in Greenwich Village. 6 women from South Carolina are on the tour. The tour guide is Becca Meyer. And she has just sent them down West 10th Street to find the oldest Federal era building on the block. So we join up with them on 10th Street. The point of view is going to move back and forth between the collective view of the 6 women and then Becca, but that will all be clear. Just days earlier, it had been muggy and airless. In the Midtown Starbucks their first afternoon, the barista had said it was like living inside your own mouth, and they had heartily agreed. But now the weather had broken. The heavy shell cracked, releasing a perfectly formed autumn. They understood now what people meant when they talked about a charge in the atmosphere, as if it had been fortified with the more important B vitamins, or caffeine-rich vapor rising off a million lattes, or maybe, mused Wynette, known as the Earth Mother of the group, just plumes of pot smoke rising from that pusher they passed in Washington Square. They had thought urban living meant small drafty boxes in the sky and taxi drivers honking and swearing and shaking their fists out their windows. They had thought it was for people made of sterner stuff. But now New York City struck them as the most civilized system for organizing human life ever devised. Laura and Wynette examined the ruddy hand-chiseled stones of the church on the corner, and Cheryl pointed out a periodontist's office tucked cleverly into the ground floor of a townhouse. Jackie admired the window boxes full of mums in muted shades of rust and mauve that seemed to emanate from the same earth as the bricks. Some houses, they noticed, had old window glass that shimmered as they passed, and others had modern panes that did nothing at all. They felt as if they'd never really looked at a building before. They passed a house with a sales banner. "Hey, let's sell everything and call this Melora person at Downtown Domiciles and buy us a row of houses," said Marianne. "And we'll let the Historical Society ladies troop through for their annual fundraiser. You think they have Historical Society ladies in New York?" "Honey, I'm sure they have Historical Society ladies in Antarctica," replied Connie. "And we'll dress in black and write inscrutable plays," said Laura. "Forget plays. I'm working my way through the Zagat Guide," proclaimed Cheryl. "And on the 7th day, we will drive to the North Fork or the South Fork or whatever fork the Hamptons are on and throw cocktail parties with the other beautiful people," said Jackie, sipping from an imaginary glass of Chardonnay. "So how much do you think it costs to park your car around here?" she asked, believing that even a fantasy deserved sound planning. Marianne cleared her throat. "I believe we have a homework assignment, ladies." They stopped to examine the house in front of them, which happened to be particularly cute. It was made of bricks, so obviously formed by hand that you could almost make out thumbprints. And it had a pair of what Wynette called sticky outie windows poking through the roof. In a nearby sycamore, a crowd of outspoken sparrows sang a twilight song. The birds were in no hurry to fly south either. "What do we think?" asked Jackie. "Is this our vote?" Even Connie nodded assent. They watched Becca approach. She favored one hip slightly, making some of them feel the electric prod of their own sciatic nerve. They wished they could get her a hot pack, a massage, a referral for an MRI. And yet there was something beautiful about the way she walked, unafraid of taking up space, dodging obstacles as if the city's atmosphere were her birthright. Marianne decided to practice it the rest of the evening so she could take it home along with the Jacques Torres chocolate bars and the playbills they would all tuck into their rolling suitcases in the morning. Before long, the sun would disappear behind Hoboken. The tours would end for the winter, and the legal proofreading would have to start. But now it was autumn, Manhattan's season of rebirth. Becca inhaled the city's perfume. One part street chestnuts, one part starch from men's shirts, one part raised pizza. As if the tour were being art directed by heavenly bodies, the earth turned a notch on its axis, and western sun poured like candlelight through every opening in the street grid. The bricks glowed. The brownstone glittered like maple sugar candy. Becca caught up to the women, standing proudly in front of the finest of the Federal era houses. She smiled and high-fived them all and called them her budding architectural historians. She had meant to be an actress. She'd meant to be a singer. She'd meant to be a history professor. She'd meant to change the world. In the middle of a tour on a crisp fall evening, she was all of the above. "So let's define the Federal style," she said. She taught them about townhouse fenestration. She showed them the pitched roof and the fan light and taught them to recognize the Flemish bond brick pattern of alternating headers and stretchers, which she said was a sign of fine workmanship. Then she snuck in a tidbit of consciousness raising, shaking her head and saying the city had long since given up the art of building on a human scale. They shook their heads too, her knowing urbanites. How I admire the people who built these little houses. See this patch in the marble where some clever mason cut a new piece and fitted it in where there must have been damage? It's called, wait for it, a Dutchman. And it's not like a new slab of stone would have been hard to come by. Westchester was full of marble, and it could be shipped right down the Hudson on barges. How come the railings all have these little openings at the bottom? Asked Jackie. Let me paint a picture for you. It's the 19th century, let's say pre-1842, because that's when the Croton Reservoir System opened and people got their first taste of clean water from upstate. Streets aren't paved. There are two main ways to travel, by foot and by horse. Oh, I know, yelled one of the others. It's a boot scraper. Becca nodded. New York used to be one poopy town. Right into the early 20th century, pigs roamed these streets. Such delight on their faces. She could have told them that in Greenwich Village, every pig had a pilot's license. She could have flapped her cape and taken off herself. And now let me introduce my colleague, Nicole Cifani Lehmann-Haupt. She's a San Francisco-based writer of fiction, poetry, and memoir. Her stories feature misfits, underdogs, and weirdos stumbling upon the extraordinary in the ordinary. Her latest story appears in the journal Active Muse and has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She teaches online level 1 at the Writer's Studio. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Michele. Also, thank you to Joel, a teacher of mine from not so very long ago, and everyone at the Writer's Studio, including my incredible colleagues, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm very grateful. This is from my short story Q, published by the journal Active Muse in December of last year. I shot hoops at the YMCA most summer nights, Swiped my card at the snacks machine. I pretended not to notice that my hair was falling out by then. Tight white chunks like lint from the dryer trap. I saw one real big piece float down the court and lost my shit because parts of me shouldn't be taken out with the trash, despite what Rico says. I wrapped my hair in a scarf, put on a cap, and double-checked my fingernails to make sure they were clean. Some nights at the Y, I got into a pickup game. That was the prime time, baby. Those guys were no joke. There were kids from the block for sure. And you also had these dudes who played for school. I'm talking scholarship level shit. Their bodies were gawky, but they had these long muscular calves, coiled tight as metal springs. They shot with a cold, smooth precision that comes with intuition, discipline. But there were all kinds of players in that gym. Big guys who played fast and loose, small guys so quick you'd hardly notice them until the ball was gone from your hands, and there they were, speeding halfway down the court in the other direction. And then there was Q. It was late July when I first met him. Me and Rico were in the middle of a drill when we saw him just sitting there, staring up at the bleachers with his ankles knocking together. As Rico waved him over, I knew what he was thinking. See what he's got, you know? Also, and we didn't say this, but it was our belief that having more people in our corner of the court would finally give us some cred. I was going through a phase where I felt shifty about people getting to know me, so I was sensitive about the rules of social acceptance and preferred to exist in the shadows of exemption. But Rico was always friendly, and so he bounced him the ball. I should say here that this olive branch was unnecessary because Q would have worked himself in eventually. It was 7 p.m. and golden light cut through the gym skylight, forming a pool on the polished gymnasium floor. Sneakers squeaked agreeably and in concert. Q was wearing a Black Flag tee that day. Every day it was a different riff on a similar genre. Bad Religion, No Effects, Ramones, Social D, Fugazi. He always came and left in a hoodie with the drawstrings pulled real tight around his face, so the cotton shaped his forehead into a half moon and wrapped the squishy part of his cheeks like a present. He was a scrawny sort of dude with a long, deliberate step, and it was only me at first who noticed the glimmer in his shoes. We all noticed the more obvious things, like how his hands flopped a little bit right after he shot, like a hinge, and now he always looked a little hungry. He took the ball and sunk a deep three-pointer. He took a step back, all like, and that's how you do it. If you ask me, I thought he looked surprised, like maybe luck had something to do with it. But that's not how other people start the story. The next day was Friday, which meant I had to go to work after school. My grandma, who I lived with, was always up at sunrise. It's like the woman didn't sleep. There was always a pot of coffee going, and when I got home late night, it was still there but burnt. And the smell permeated the kitchen, like, hey, I shouldn't be here, and you shouldn't either. We lived 15 miles from a mining town that produces molybdenum. It's an element used in alloy steel and has the second highest melting point after tantalum and tungsten. The symbol on the periodic table is Mo, which always made me laugh, which made it easy to remember. Mo is used in missiles, engines, saw blades, drills, war supplies, basically. The backs of the mountains in this town are one of the biggest sources for molybdenum in the country, and this is why my hair is white. This is also why Grandma spent her Fridays picketing. I was always like this, she would say, meaning a generally pissed off human. But when you saw her later on, sunk so comfortably into the couch, knitting or some shit, you just didn't buy it. I worked at a paint store that summer. Whenever it was slow, I stayed in the back room and mixed samples. I scraped the paint down the sides of the tin with a wood scraper, and it made a soft affirmative sound that people on the internet seemed to like. I was trying to mix the right shades of red because I had this idea to paint giant horizontal flames across the sides of my sneakers. I was posting my progress to social media, but my manager Bick saw this and said, hey, cut it out. You're going to get the store in trouble, were his words. He would know. All his friends are virtual and on social media. I was jealous because I wish I could be that conversational with people. His thumbs always flew like it was nobody's business. It was raining outside, which made a big releasing sound, an enormous yawn. Biggs the big man was gone, and because of the weather, business was slow. The basketball team tryouts were in 2 weeks. Okay, maybe it was more like a month. I figured if I shortened the timeline in my head, I'd hustle harder. I put on my favorite basketball podcast, Hype. There's also Dunked and Deep Game, but those are for noobs. I held my right hand down with my left as I mixed, pressing flesh onto bone. Sometimes my hands shook. Unnecessary evils, Grandma called the drugs, and the side effects, like my shakes. I also have peripheral neuropathy, which causes my legs and feet to jump around without me telling them to. I don't mind, but sometimes I have a hard time keeping still. I added more orange to the pail, and right when I was getting somewhere, the front door dinged. I leaned back, stuck my head out, and saw Q. Hey man, I said, what's up? What are you doing here? I jumped from the overturned bucket I was sitting on. He was also surprised, eyes wide like an owl on speed. I didn't know you worked here, he said. I was grabbing a burrito across the street. You go to Fairview, right? He went on to tell me that his dad moved to Fairview after they were both in an accident. What happened? I asked. He pushed his hoodie back to reveal a long scar that ran across his forehead and twisted down the sides of his face in both directions. I tried not to react when he showed me this. Besides, I've been told I have a good poker face. I said, so both you and your dad got struck by lightning, huh? Which was idiotic, I know. But what I was trying to understand was how the hell this happened to two people and at the same time. And why would they have to move to a new town? But people are messed up. That's one thing I did understand. Behind every smile, a question, and behind that, some pre-baked opinion. I knew this in the way that people looked at me. So Q and I had a lot in common, and I like to think that's why we became friends. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Lisa Bellamy. Lisa teaches a variety of classes at the Writers Studio, including live remote advanced poetry, and continues to study with director and founder Philip Schultz. Her poetry and short prose have been published widely in literary journals. She is the author of the poetry collection, The Northway, the Encircle Publications Chapbook Prize winner, Nectar, and winner of a Pushcart Prize. She is working on new collections of poetry and animal fables. She lives in Brooklyn and the Adirondack Park. Please join me in welcoming Lisa Bellamy.
Thank you. It was wonderful to hear everybody so far. And thank you, Joel. And thank you, Writers Studio. I'm very happy to be here. The first poem I'm going to read is a brand new prose poem that I've written fairly recently. Dear Aunt Nellie, all I wanted was pickled beets, Aunt Nellie's brand, and liverwurst from Usinger's in Milwaukee. The best supper was a quick slurp, then a dash upstairs to my bedroom to slam the door against barbarians. Aunt Nellie was the one. The supposed Native American woman on the butter package scared me. She was beautiful, like a baton twirler or prom queen, long black hair, big eyes, yellow beaded costume. I knew I wasn't someone she would ever be friends with, unlike the cartoon beer commercial bear beating a tom-tom. He, it seemed, was a peer, but Aunt Nellie was different. I loved her picture label pasted on the jar. Clear, direct gaze into my eyes, gray hair, gingham apron, that little smile. She understood my hunger. These days, I believe she would understand my retinal woes. We are now nearly the same age, and I will get new glasses next week. An eagle can see a rabbit from 2 miles. That is the kind of eyesight I want. Missy, my dad once said, with your eyesight, you would have been eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Fresh hell, Dad, what was that? Nellie, please, let's go to lunch. My right eye's retina is stretchy, the oomph leaking like a brain, I imagine, like memories. I hope my memories don't leak. Nellie, the human realm is precarious. I do not understand it. I am highly dubious the artist formerly known as God does either, but I do know that I will not let the surgeon approach my eye, scoop out the jelly like an egg yolk. Adam, my evasive optometrist, said, you get the surgery. Yeah, you do get cataracts. Then yes, you do need surgery for the cataracts, but it's not really as bad as it sounds. Yes, it is, Adam. Yes, it is. Thank you. The next poem I'm going to read is titled Delight. It was published last summer by Hole in the Head Review. The epigraph is a sign on the New York Thruway, a billboard. And the sign was, what is your delight? And this is what I wrote in response when I saw the sign. Delight. What is your delight? A jarring, even outrageous question, given our current apocalypses, yet, despite everything, spring still delights. Blossoming bluets, coltsfoot, trout lilies, and so forth, even though the process, i.e. the budding, the greening, seems increasingly tenuous. Also, the rooster down the road. If there is a God, I vote for a pushy God, a bantam leghorn God. Sleepers, awake, rise up before it is too late. Emily's process delights. She relies on magic. Make a wish, she said, inviting me into E. Suzanne's exclusive clubhouse, i.e. her bedroom, and shut the door. When I said, I want everyone to love each other, she replied, that's not a wish. She has her criteria. I said, fine, I want a brown dog then. And she asked, what is his name? I had to think fast. Jack. She wrinkled her nose. These days, only names like rainbow, sparkly, glittery lady pony delight her, but she generously granted the boon. Indeed, dogs are my delight, especially dachshunds, noisy flop-eared emblems of assertive mind. Tonight, red borscht is my delight. Beets, the hearty bulwark, also outspoken vinegar, sour cream, also hard maple candies, baked as tiny leaves, white, flaking or shaving sugar, burst in the mouth from Black Rooster Farm in Keene. Despite our inanities, the human voice delights, its fabrications, its frail songs, first poetry, ecstatic utterance, the flowing, then stories, fables, but calorie rich, like loaded baked potatoes stuffed with sour cream, chives, basil, not celery. I just realized I can chop beets for fables. Forget the celery. Did I mention Milwaukee? Delightful pickled beets, sweet and sour. I loved to pucker and spoon it in. Yum, baby, yum. What brings me delight? Of course, Theo's dreamy face, a cool customer until his mother brings hot pancakes to the table and he stands in his chair and head to toe, he shrieks, sugar, syrup, maple syrup. How long will we be here? The next poem is titled Thundersome. I've found over the years that I write psalms from time to time, and I seem to be writing more of them. This was published in Juniper magazine in winter of 2022. Thundersome, and this references actually something that happened to me. As your cloud turned dark, then darker, like a fool, I stood in the meadow, angry after a quarrel with my beloved, distracted, careless with myself. An old habit. I opened my mouth to taste rain, invited lightning to amuse me. Thunder, you are the good God. You tried. You spoke, you rumbled, but I refused your warning until you lowered yourself, cracked hard over my head. In retrospect, I see that was love. I yelped, I ran into the house, but thunder, you were not finished. You followed me, you shook the house until I crouched on the living room rug, a small heart palpitating mammal. And finally, I remembered the old humility. Yes, thunder, yes. Thank you. So we are at war. We are all at war. Ukraine is in the front line. It's a war that we are all fighting. And I was reminded of a poem I wrote in the Northway, which is my collection from 2018. And I've very much been thinking of the women of Ukraine. And so I thought I would read this poem. Who can forget the grannies? I shudder when I think of the 8-foot beavers, grunting, squatting, splashing, spitting in our river, tiny-brained, squinting Pleistocene thugs, bearing incisors longer than a human arm. They infested ponds and rivers, smothered gasping fish with their acid-spiked toxic urine. They slapped their murderous tails. Bleeding, they dragged themselves up the riverbank, smelling sweet grass. They charged crawling babies, the tiny baby bones, trampling, they didn't care. Hooray for naked yelling, stone-aged grannies. They dropped hammerstones, they grabbed sharpened sticks. Who can forget their skinny, bouncing breasts? They beat the giant beavers, they smeared thick beaver blood over each other's faces, over their bony, serviceable buttocks. Who can forget the grannies? So the last poem I'm going to read also relates to the war that we are all in. It's a war I became aware of perhaps 10 years ago. And again, it's a war that we are all in our sorrow involved in. And this is a spell of sorts. The title is Ezekiel. I've been reading the prophet Ezekiel. Ezekiel, I will send the rain of authority, rain to chase the devil back to hell, smeary goose shit rain, rain of snarling martins, rain of mud and tar, rumors of war rain to trigger his disgust, rain of defiant lovers, naked tongue rain, his worst nightmare rain. I will send the rain of warrior babies, tiny swords, breastplates of righteousness. I will send flummoxing rain, rain to ding his minions, spiritual warfare rain. I will send rain in it for the long haul, rain biding its time, watchful crow rain, rain beyond his pay grade, deceptively soft, Matahari rain. I will send slain in the spirit rain, Holy Ghost rain, prophecy rain, Om Shanti Shanti rain, no tweeting rain, turn off the TV rain, rain to scour his demon stink, rain of purification, everlasting white birch rain. God, help me rain. I will send blasting rain. Scram, I will say. Beat it, I will say, be gone. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure to introduce Peggy Stone. Peggy Stone lives in the San Francisco Bay Area and writes poetry, short fiction, creative nonfiction, and memoir. She loves teaching her class Memoir Over 50 at the Writer's Studio. And I'm going to say, although this was not written in her biography, we worked together in my prose poem poetry class very recently. And she's an absolutely wonderful teacher and writer. And I learned as much from her as she perhaps may have learned from the class. An absolutely stunning writer. So tonight she's reading from her memoir manuscript. So here's Peggy.
Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful introduction. I'm certainly honored and so happy to be reading here with these great writers. The phone call. You never stop to think that this might be the call that will mark everything as before and after. You just pick up the receiver, and when the voice on the other end states the unimaginable, your sister is dead, you hear your own shriek, and it's not yours, it's some other woman shrieking. And you're watching from a perch up in the corner of the ceiling. The other woman, the one this is happening to, is below you. She's holding the phone with the curly cued cable extending from the receiver to the wall. You wonder why the cable is all twisted up, kinked inside itself, why the woman is still gripping the receiver, white-knuckled, although there's no one on the other end anymore. Tears run down her cheeks. How, you wonder, did she ever let that phone line get so curled in on itself, so messy? If she could just take the receiver from her ear where it is frozen and let it hang upside down from the ends of her fingers, maybe she could uncurl the kinks, let all those springs unwind in a counterclockwise direction until the whole wire would loosen to a straight line. Then she could just set the phone down, carefully, quietly step away, and the call never would have happened at all. The sauna. I sit with Sheldon, my husband, and Mo, my sister's boyfriend, in the steam sauna at the Munich Hotel. Folded in bathrobes, sweat rolls down our faces. Our plan? Catch the train for the German Alps at noon. We're hoping for answers to questions we have about Henya's death, and we plan to talk to the people who saw her last alive. Sheldon and Mo are trading laughs, doing their best to lighten the mood while they watch me closely, unable to keep the worry from their eyes. Some weather we're having, eh? Says Mo, who is trying out his English language skills. They are both waiting for me to stand up, to lead them out of the heat, to get our bags packed for the long train ride. My limbs are leaden. I can imagine movement, but I cannot summon the agency to shift my weight onto my feet, slide into my sandals, straighten my knees, and shuffle my legs toward the door. Through the glass, I see others preparing to enter the sauna. An old woman with wraith-like limbs carefully folds her dress and sets it down on a chair. A man with a shaved head and a fierce falcon tattoo on his arm opens the sauna door and sits on the bench across from mine. I calculate that they are each old enough to have been teenagers during the war, when the Nazis were in power and a teen would have said and done just about anything to acquire a moldy loaf of bread to keep her and her family alive for another week. There is no oxygen. The air is dirt and I can't get out from under it. The steam of the sauna becomes something else. The tile walls are radiating oven-like heat. I want answers to the questions that are running laps inside my head. It's been 43 days since my sister's death, so can I still call Mo her boyfriend? How long does a relationship remain intact when one of the people is dead? I can't reckon with my sister's death because my love for her is as alive as ever. Sheldon and I tell Mo we will meet him out front with packed bags in an hour. Walking back to our room, I see a windy drizzle through the window. The weather isn't nearly nasty enough to stand in the way of our departure, and I am wishing for torrents of rain. Sheldon is silent, purse-lipped, mentally mapping out the interviews we will be conducting the following day. I am relieved and terrified to have him at my side. I am not sure how much of the truth I can hear. I hadn't wanted to make this trip, but there was no one else. My parents, Holocaust survivors, were no more able to come to Germany than they were able to walk across the ocean to get here. My remaining sister, Judy, was still breastfeeding her infant son. I'll go, I said at the family dinner as we all lurched around my mother's kitchen, preparing another evening meal that was to remain untouched. I knew Sheldon wouldn't let me go alone. We devised a tight itinerary so that we'd only leave our kids, 2 and 4, for 9 days. Back in our hotel room, I sit on a pile of crumpled blankets and pull a plastic bag from my backpack. We retrieved the bag from the US consulate here in Munich. Everything Henya had with her the night she died. I pull out her black and white toiletry case. I'd watched my mother give it to Henya for her birthday this past February, and 2 months later, the case is almost brand new, shiny and clean, a delicate pattern of tree shadows on its cover. The zipper is stuck, and when I manage to open it, treasures tumble out, including a pair of pearl droplet earrings, a gift from Mo. I put these on. Next, I take the belt, measuring its heft, a brief chestnut-colored strip of leather with a heavy buckle at the end. She wore that belt for every occasion. A few days after we'd learned of her death, I'd received a letter from Henya with a photo enclosed. In it, she and Mo stood in front of a fountain, water spouting out of a sea monster's mouth. Leafy trees towered behind. She looked happy, her eyes grabbing at me from the gloss of the photo, brown curls falling around her shoulders. The belt hugs her waist under the drape of Mo's arms, circling her jumpsuit tight. Now I hold that belt up against my own waist and check my reflection in the hotel mirror. The black skirt I'd worn each day of the trip stretches across my hips. Curls I had pulled forward to frame my face have sprung back and spiral toward the ceiling. My eyes are shadowed by dark, bruising circles. Henya's belt doesn't reach around my middle. It is impossibly small. Even now, as I grieve for my sister, I covet the circumference of her waist. I roll the leather up, shove it into the plastic bag, and consider what remains. A gray moleskin calendar, a small makeup bag, a short black leather bomber jacket, black shoes, size 5.5. These unremarkable objects of Henya's daily comings and goings. I shower and pack. It is time to meet Mo in the lobby. Thank you.
I get to be the audience for everybody. Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you, Peggy and Nicole. Thank you, Lisa, Michele, Peter. Just terrific. Just a great range. Terrific. And thank you to the audience for hanging in there the whole time. That was just great. We're going to end now, but I'm just going to put up a slide to give people information about how to get in touch with the Writer Studio if you want to follow up. And also we have some exciting news, which is Phil Schultz, the founder, is going to be releasing his second memoir, Comforts of the Abyss. That's going to be available in June, and we're going to put up a card for that. But in the meantime, here's to our readers. Terrific, very inspirational. I've got to go now take notes. It was great. And thank you all for attending.